Last week in the Hurricane Part 1, Captain Redbeard stole a ship from the English and was last seen sailing into a hurricane. This is the Hurricane Part 2. The sky exploded, the rain thrashed us, and the ship rolled from side to side with the fierce wind. Barrels rolled about on deck, and so did the men. I saw one of the crew disappear over the side into the thrashing blackness. "Tie yourself to something, lads," I roared, but they couldn't hear me over the howling wind. I tied myself to the mast, and the others must have seen me doing it, because they did the same, but not before 3 more men vanished over the side, eaten by the hungry ocean. Our sailing master was fighting with the ship's wheel. He sailed across the waves so we didn't have to face them head on, but he was sailing at such a steep angle that cargo was flying overboard. At least the English weren't chasing us anymore. The hurricane tore through the ship, and I started to hear a creaking noise. It was loud, very loud, and I didn't know what it was until I saw the cracks appear. The mast was coming down, and I was still tied to it. I grabbed my sword and started slicing through the ropes, but it was too late. The mast snapped and rolled overboard, with me still tied to it. I awoke on a sandy beach, the sound of water lapping against the shore. It was bright. The storm was over. I could see the broken mast on the sand in front of me, and all sorts of broken bits of wood. I thought about my ship, the Hurricane, and was filled with sadness. It must have been wrecked. I walked around the beach looking for survivors, but found none, and every step hurt me. There was no food, no supplies, and no people. I started to panic, but calmed myself. I had to find food, water, and shelter. The island was flat, apart from a few big rocks here and there, and a thick patch of trees in the middle. That's where I headed. At first there was nothing, just a few leaves that didn't look edible, and then I saw them. High up in the trees there was coconuts. I shook the tree, but nothing happened. I tried again and again, and one finally came loose. Unfortunately for me, I looked up at the wrong time. The coconut fell onto my head and knocked me out. It was cold and dark when I awoke. I looked down and saw a big bug crawling up my chest. I screamed and brushed it off. I stood up and started looking for the coconut, but it was nowhere to be found. The darkness wasn't helping, but it had to be somewhere. I scrabbled around on the floor but found nothing, so I headed back to the beach, hoping I could find a bit of wood I could use to knock another one down without knocking myself out again. That's when I saw him. I was not alone. The moonlight flooded the beach, and the sea looked silver in the glow. The figure was crouched on the beach, looking through the bits of wood that had been wrecked. In one hand he had a coconut, my coconut. It was clear to me that this man was not one of my crew, and he looked like he had been here a while. He must have heard me coming, because he turned around and hissed, "My coconut." "Well, actually," I said, but he cut me off. "My coconut!" he screamed. I nodded and started to back away slowly, but he leapt up and ran towards me. I started to run, but fell over, and then he was upon me. He poked my face and ruffled my hair. "My coconut!" he screamed and started dancing on the sand. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Was he dangerous? His skin was very red, like he had been in the sun for too long. Maybe the heat had fried his brain. His clothes were ragged and torn, and he had a scruffy brown beard and very long, dirty hair. He came back over to me and poked me once more. "You are real?" he asked. I nodded, and he screamed with delight, dancing that ape-like dance again. "Who are you?" I asked, and he stopped dancing. He put his coconut on the floor. "My coconut," he said, pointing at it. I nodded. "I am Oliver, king of the island," he said proudly. "King? Does that mean there are other people here too?" I asked. He nodded and took my arm. "I'll show you." He led me into the trees. There were sticks stacked on the floor covered with leaves, his bed. Nearby was a big campfire, smouldering gently, and around it were 3 big logs, but what I saw on them made me burst out laughing. Sat on each of the logs was a person, but not a human, no. These were people made of sticks with coconut heads, and on each of the heads was a face scratched into it. One of the stick people even had a dress on. I laughed and laughed and couldn't stop. King Oliver looked at me for a moment, then burst out into laughter himself. When the laughter died away, he grabbed an open coconut and handed it to me. "Your coconut," he said. I drank the water inside and ate the crunchy meat. It tasted wonderful. "How long have you been here?" I asked. 2 years, he said sadly. "And no one's come to rescue you?" "No one knows I'm here," he said. "Well, how did you get here?" I asked. He shook his head and said, "You sleep now. I will tell you in the morning." I decided I didn't want to sleep in between the trees, so headed back to the beach. It didn't take me long to drift off. A sharp pinch to my nose woke me. I opened my eyes and a large red crab was stood in front of me, her claws clacking together. I jumped up and threw it into the sea, rubbing my sore nose. Behind me, King Oliver began to giggle. "You sit and eat," he said. "I'll tell you my story." Thanks for listening, everyone. We hope you enjoyed the story. Next week, it'll be King Oliver, Part 1. Remember to like and subscribe.